Early 1967. February by most accounts. A dirt trail in South Vietnam, mid-morning, and a man is pushing a bicycle. Not a bicycle anyone rides, loaded past its own weight with weapons, walked forward by hand. One of tens of thousands of porters moving a war's supplies on foot. He does not know it, but a bullet has already been in the air for almost 6 seconds. It arrives. The load goes into the dirt, and then, roughly a second later, a flat, distant thump rolls across the valley. The sound of the shot finally catching up. If you were standing beside him, you would have had no idea which way to look. That is the question, not who fired, how anyone could have found a shooter a mile and a half away. First, a correction, because you have probably seen this told wrong. The popular version puts Marines on Pacific Islands, Japanese troops in the tree line, telescopes bolted to machine guns. It is not true. There is no documented program, no doctrine, no named engagement of Marines scope sniping with a .50 caliber in the Second World War. The paper trail starts in a different war. The man on that hillside was not holding a rifle. He was lying behind a crew-served machine gun that weighed more than he did, designed in the 1930s to shoot at aircraft and armor. Hold on to 3 things. The record set that morning would stand for about 35 years, and when it fell twice in a single week to 2 men from the same team. The man who built the rifle that broke it had no gunsmithing training at all. In 1967, he was carrying a camera. And the reason nobody could find the shooter comes down to one number: 1,500 yards, and what happens to a bullet past that mark. But none of this begins in Vietnam. To understand how a Marine ended up lying behind a machine gun with a telescope bolted to the side of it, you have to go back 15 years, to a war fought across frozen hills where the enemy simply stood too far away to shoot. Korea, 1952. The opposing lines often sat 1,200 yards apart or more. The M1 Garand could not usefully reach across that gap. Enemy marksmen could. They worked at leisure, from cover, at a range their targets could not answer. Being under fire is one thing. Being under fire you cannot answer is another. And it wears men down in ways casualty lists never show. So an officer somewhere asked the only useful question left. What in a rifle company reaches that far? Exactly one thing. The .50 caliber Browning in the perimeter. 84 pounds of gun, 44 pounds of tripod, 128 pounds of weapon system nobody had ever thought of as a marksman's tool. And it needed no modification. Browning had built the capability in. Flip the bolt latch release up and the machine gun becomes a manually fed single shot, chambered by hand, 1 round at a time. A sniper rifle had been a factory option since 1933. Nobody had used it. Making it hit took a trick. Marine Sergeant Joseph Eberlin, quoted in American Rifleman, described operators who could squeeze off single rounds with tracer and zero in on a target more easily. Load tracer, fire 1, watch the arc, dial the correction, fire again. A machine gun walked onto a target the way artillery does. Army Captain Kenneth Unertl issued scoped .50s to 3 infantry platoons and reported success. Both services were doing versions of this. Nobody gets to claim they were first. The effect was psychological first. In early 1952, a Marine battalion commander dodged a Chinese sniper's round. He put scoped .50s into his line and afterward reported that in nothing flat, there was no more sniping on our positions. He then stood up a 3-week sniper course for 3rd Battalion 5th Marines, the scoped .50 in the curriculum beside M1C Garands and Springfields. By war's end, the 1st Marine Regiment's sniper school was training students out to 1,200 yards. Not doctrine, a field expedient that got good enough to teach. But wanting to hit a man at 1,200 yards and actually being able to do it are 2 different problems. And the thing that solved the second one was not the gun at all. It was the thing the gun was bolted to. The gun was never the accurate part. What made those shots repeatable sat underneath it. The M3 tripod's traverse and elevation mechanism. Roughly 50 mils of elevation, adjustable 1 mil per click, and around 500 mils of windage. Target turrets, machined in steel, sitting under a machine gun in every infantry company since 1933. Machine gun grade accuracy ran about 5 minutes of angle, 5 inches at 100 yards. By rifle standards, poor. At 1,000 yards, still torso-sized. The gun never had to be good. It had to be good enough, and it had to reach. A 50 round runs roughly 650 to 700 grains, a tenth of a pound of metal, leaving the muzzle near 2,900 feet per second. Call it 5 times the energy of a .30 caliber round. At 1,500 yards, it would still punch through 21 inches of packed soil. Cover that had been safe for 2 years was now furniture. One man took it further. Captain William S. Brophy, U.S. Army Ordnance, Korea, 1952, already a Pacific infantry veteran. He took a captured Soviet PTRD anti-tank rifle, threaded in a .50 caliber Browning aircraft barrel, added a bipod, a butt pad, and a Unertl target scope, and built what nobody had issued, a shoulder-fired single-shot .50. On paper, it shouldn't have worked. It grouped around 8 minutes of angle, 80-inch groups at 1,000 yards. He recorded hits out to 2,000, because the alternative was not shooting at all. That rifle sits in the NRA National Firearms Museum today. Remember it. It matters later. None of these men set a record. They solved a local problem and went home. The technique survived in 2 Marine school curricula, and in the men taught it. Everything so far explains how a machine gun could kill at 1,000 yards. None of it explains 2,500, double what those schools trained to, and 3 to 5 times the reach of every rifle in that valley in 1967. For that, the improvisation needed one thing Korea never had: a national champion lying behind it. Carlos Norman Hathcock II, born in 1942. In 1965, before he ever deployed, he won the Wimbledon Cup at Camp Perry, the 1,000-yard national championship, any site. He arrived in country as, arguably, the finest long-range rifle shot in America. Vietnamese forces called him Long Trang, white feather, for the one he wore in the band of his bush hat. Other Marines began wearing feathers too, to muddy the trail for counter-snipers. The bounty figures that circulate trace to his own account, not to captured documents. He carried a mounting bracket of his own design, hardware that let him fit an 8-power Unertl telescopic sight to an M2 Browning. Unertl was the same optics house whose 8-power USMC sniper scopes had sat on Marine Springfields in the Pacific 20 years earlier. Perhaps 400 to 700 rifles across all 4 divisions. That is how small Marine sniping really was in that war, and exactly why nobody out there was scoping .50 caliber machine guns. A hillside position, the gun on a sandbagged M3 tripod. Bolt latch up, single shot, 8 power. Out along the trail, at a distance commonly cited as roughly 2,500 yards, about 2,290 meters, a man is pushing a bicycle stacked with weapons. He dials elevation in mils, clicks it in, presses the latch. Most accounts describe 2 rounds. The first disables the bicycle, the second finds the man. Others describe a single hit. We do not know which, and anyone certain is guessing. What is not in dispute is the range and the weapon. A supply line severed at 1.5 miles. Now the sourcing. Almost everything the public knows about Hathcock descends from one book, Charles Henderson's 1986 biography, Marine Sniper, 93 confirmed kills. That figure is the one he is officially credited with, and it is genuinely disputed. The scholar Jerry Lemke has publicly questioned parts of the legend. The famous set pieces come from Hathcock's own telling and cannot be independently confirmed. The 2,500-yard shot with the machine gun is the part everybody accepts, skeptics included. The shot is the famous part. It is not the interesting part. The interesting part is what happened downrange in the 6 seconds after he pressed that latch, and why the men in that valley had no usable way of knowing which direction to run. Start with what we do not have. No Vietnamese diary, no interrogation report, no memoir describing confusion about mystery fire from the hills. Not Vietnamese, not Chinese, not Japanese. What follows is not testimony. It is arithmetic, and stronger than any invented quote. A man under fire hunts for 3 things. At that range, he loses all 3. The first is the flash. At 2,500 yards, it is a pinprick inside a 1.5 miles of terrain, from a gun emplaced, camouflaged, and firing once. Nothing to see. The second is the crack, the supersonic snap overhead that hands you a line to trace back. A 50 caliber ball round goes subsonic at roughly 1,500 to 1,600 yards. That is the number from the top of this story. At 2,500, it arrives slower than sound. No crack, no line, no direction. The third is the report, and this is where the telling goes wrong. The bullet does not outrun sound. At the target, it is slower than sound, but the muzzle blast still has to cross the same 1.5 miles of air. Time of flight at that range, roughly 5.9 seconds. The sound, about 6.7. The impact lands a second before anyone hears anything, and what arrives is a flat thump that could be almost anything. It behaves backwards. The gap is wider closer in. At 1,000 yards, the bullet takes about 1.5 seconds. The sound roughly 2.7. That delay is longer than at 2,500 because the round bleeds so much speed on the way out. But the physics is not the real answer. This is. 2,500 yards is 3 to 5 times the practical reach of the rifles those men carried. Every instinct sends you the same way. Get down. Scan the near tree line. Watch the edge of rifle range. It all searches a square that does not contain the shooter. The physics does not hide the gun. The assumption does. And it still worked when it arrived. Roughly 1,000 foot-pounds, about what a .44 Magnum makes at the muzzle, after 6 seconds in the air. One more correction. No Geneva Convention text forbids firing a .50 at a man. The belt buckle rule taught in some basic training is folklore, born of a misread of the phrase anti-materiel rifle. So that is the answer. What is left is what it built, because a record set with a machine gun in 1967 has no business standing 35 years, and even less being broken by a rifle a photographer designed. The record stood for roughly 35 years. It fell in March 2002 in Afghanistan during Operation Anaconda. Canadian Master Corporal Aaron Perry hit at 2,310 meters. Within days, Corporal Rob Furlong went further, 2,430. 2 men from the same sniper team after 3.5 decades of nobody. It was the longest confirmed kill for 35 years. It has been beaten several times since. Both fired purpose-built 50 caliber rifles. Rifles that exist because of what men did with the wrong tool in Korea and Vietnam. Which brings us back to the photographer. Ronnie Barrett had no gunsmithing training. He was photographing a river patrol boat, noticed the 50 caliber machine gun on it, and realized nobody had built a rifle for that cartridge. So he built one. The M82, 1982. The M82A1 by 1986. The Marine Corps bought about 125 for Desert Storm. In the summer of 2002, it received full materiel release as the M107 long-range sniper rifle, caliber 50. The same season Hathcock's record fell, to exactly the class of weapon his improvisation had argued into existence. Brophy's homemade monster in that museum case was the first draft. Hathcock's own war ended elsewhere. On the 16th of September 1969, an anti-tank mine detonated under his amphibious tractor. Badly burned, he pulled 7 Marines off the vehicle before he was dragged clear himself. A Purple Heart then, the Silver Star about 30 years later, multiple sclerosis in 1975. He spent the years after helping build the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School at Quantico and died in 1999. The story gets told as a trick shot. It isn't one. It is men with a weapon never meant for the job, a tripod that turned out to be a target turret, a factory feature nobody had used in 30 years, and a champion who knew exactly how far he could reach. Every anti-materiel rifle in service today is downstream of that. If you want more debriefs like this one, the engineering, the men, and the parts of the record that don't survive a fact check, subscribe and we'll go again.